Hello and welcome back to my channel. I thought that it would be fun to take a little bit of time and talk about the brands that I'm interested in trying as far as eyeshadow goes in the year 2022. I've been doing eyeshadow for 1 year now. In fact, pretty soon I'll be posting up a little anniversary video. And I started off being ColourPop only, and I thought I'll just be a ColourPop girl because I fell into that brand and I discovered great quality right off the bat and I was excited. But then I discovered BH Cosmetics, and then I discovered Glamlight, and then I discovered Udenzi, and at this point I have 5 or 6 different brands represented in my collection. So I thought, okay, I have opened up the can of worms, down the rabbit hole. I'm into eyeshadow, so I thought it would be fun to just sit and talk about which brands have caught my eye moving into the new year. Before we get further into this video, today's eye look was filmed and it is currently live on my channel as we speak. And if you haven't been here before, welcome. My name is Rachel. I am a homeschooling stay-at-home mom who loves to play with colorful eyeshadow. It's true I don't know much about other kinds of makeup. For me, it's all about the eyes. So if you're interested in tutorials and reviews, collections, decolors, anything like that, I hope you'll consider liking and subscribing. I do try to upload about 3 videos a week, and you can find me on Instagram as well at Shimmers and Silver. Now, let's talk about eyeshadow. All right, I'm just gonna scooch to the side a little bit here because I do plan on putting up a couple pictures up here as I talk so that you can see the specific palettes that have caught my eye. The first brand I want to mention is Melt Cosmetics. The reason I mentioned this one first is because I just got this in the mail. I'm so excited about it. This is the Melt Amor y Mariposas eyeshadow palette. It is gorgeous. It is so gorgeous. This is the palette that I used for today's eye look, and I have so many plans, like so many looks that I can pull out of these shades. I'm super excited to dip into it more. I'm so excited. But I wanted to try Melt because I had seen this palette advertised and I was like, no way, there's no way I can afford a palette like that. It's way out of my price range. But I'm on an app called Poshmark, which is where you can get secondhand, cosmetic items and other things. But I've bought several hard-to-find eyeshadow palettes or more expensive eyeshadow palettes for great deals on Poshmark. And I paid $25 for this, which is originally a $70 eyeshadow palette. So anyway, as far as Melt goes, it is one of the brands that I wanted to try in 2022, and I can now say that I have tried it, and I'm very impressed with the quality. The shadows worked beautifully, they blended, they're pigmented, they are really top-notch quality, so I'm really excited about this, and I had to mention that first because it was on my list for the year. Another brand that I'm interested in trying in 2022 is Juvia's Place. One of my favorite YouTubers is Angelica Nyqvist, and she loves Juvia's Place, and I've seen various videos of her where she uses the Berries palette. She also talks about the Violets palette and the Sweet Pinks palette, and I think all of those are just really pretty. I know Angelica loves berry colored eyeshadow, so she has quite a good range, and if she recommends something, then you know it's a good recommendation because she's tried a lot. But I think that those berry, raspberry pink tones are just very pretty, and those palettes have certainly caught my eye. Lately, I have been looking pretty intensely at the Norvina palettes from Anastasia Beverly Hills, specifically the Norvina 1 through 3. And I kind of go back and forth on these. I actually have several of them saved in my Poshmark account, like, hey, maybe I'll buy these, So the Norvina 1 is very pretty, but I feel like I have a lot of those shades in my collection already. Then the Norvina 2 is blue greens, but surprisingly, I don't feel very excited about that palette, and I think it's because of the tones of blue greens that were used, and I'll reference that later on in this video. A lot of those tones are a little bit more on the muted side. The blue pigments are a little bit more purple-ish, which in and of itself I really like, but I have discovered that on my own skin tone, purple leaning blues can be a dangerous territory for me to get into, so I have to be careful with those. And then I think that the greens that they chose for that palette are just not very exciting. Like, it's a pretty palette, but each time I see the pictures of it, I go, oh, and that's enough for me to really consider whether or not I want to spend money on it. And then the Norvina 3, that's the one that has caught my attention the most because that is a palette full of shadows that I don't really have in my collection. It's got a lot of oranges, a lot of like weird shades of green, lime green, neon, radioactive green, just greens that I don't really have. And I don't have a lot of oranges. I have an orange in my Cat's Breath palette. I have a couple orangey tones in the Glamlight X Michaela palette. Like, I have a few oranges here and there, but the Norvina Volume 3 from ABH has a lot more orange and reddish and brownish kinds of tones. It's a very fall sort of palette. I think it's pretty. I'm not fully sold on it yet because I do think that there are several shades in there that are kind of too close to each other, and because it's such a big palette, I think that a lot of those shades might go unused. I would prefer to have a smaller palette with a more cohesive and tidy color story that doesn't have sort of duplicate shades, just because they're not going to get used. Like, I just did a video for the Beauty Bay Love Notes palette, and there were between 3 and 4 light to mid-toned matte shadows in both pink and purple. And really, we don't need that many. We could have used 2 and put other colors in the palette. So when you have a lot of shadows like that, you really need to be smart about your color choices, and it's easy, especially if you're on a color theme, it's easy to just end up having almost duplicates within the palette, and that's kind of a turn off. I mean, especially for an expensive palette, you know, ABH is, they're what, $50, $60, $70, so I'm not going to spend that much buying them secondhand, but even so, I don't want to spend $30 if I'm not going to use a quarter of the eyeshadows. And while we're talking about bigger palettes that have a lot of colors, let's talk about Blend Bunny. I think that Blend Bunny is an interesting brand. It's gotten some really good reviews. They just released the Dollhouse palette, which quite frankly doesn't interest me, although I really like the way that that palette is laid out. It just makes sense, the way they've got the colors grading from light to dark, and then you have, if I'm remembering correctly, I think, you know, a full row of shimmers. I think that palette's just laid out very well, and I have that opinion for each of the Blend Bunny palettes that I've seen. Even if it's not something like a color story to which I feel very drawn, I appreciate how it's laid out, because sometimes you see a palette and it's just like they just threw the shades in there without any consideration as far as how it looks and how people might be able to make an eyeshadow look work. So I just really appreciate it when there is a palette that is laid out thoughtfully. And the one palette which has caught my eye is the Blend Bunny's Blends palette, which might have been their first, or maybe Surge was their first. I don't remember. But the Blends palette is just a nice rainbow palette, which comes super highly recommended. So I'm kind of keeping an eye out for that. I don't think that I would go to the effort of looking for it, but if I stumble across it at a good price, I might get it. At this point, I think my collection is large enough that pretty much anything is represented, so it has to be something special to really catch my eye for me to want to put out money. I'm sure that those things will come along, but when I first started playing with eyeshadow, I was just buying all the ColourPop I could. And first off, that's not fiscally responsible, and I had to I kind of kicked myself for it after the fact because I shouldn't have done that. Secondly, now that I'm a year into the eyeshadow journey, I really have a better handle on my preferences, my style, my colors, what I like to do, how I like to apply it, and so I have gotten rid of a good amount of my initial purchases because I just figured out myself a little bit better. And so, I mean, at this point, a palette needs to be special enough for me to go, oh, that's unique. I don't have that, or I don't have those colors together, or I don't have, you know, those formulas or whatever, in order for me to really want to spend money on it. One brand that I do specifically want to try is the Natasha Denona Love Palette. I kind of went back and forth as far as, do I want to try the Love Palette or the Retro Palette? And when I see them next to each other, Love is a lot more pinky red, purple, deeper, more pigmented tones, and the Retro Palette is more mauves and browns and neutrals. And I honestly had 2 palettes in my collection that were more of those tones, the mauvey tones, which I decluttered because I just didn't wear them. One of them, for example, was the ColourPop Making Mauves palette, and it was a really pretty palette. I especially liked the shimmers in that palette, but I feel like they didn't show up, like those colors didn't really show up on my skin. The fact that I got rid of palettes within the same color family as the Natasha Denona Retro palette tells me that I should not spend money on the Retro palette. It could be amazing quality, but if I'm not going to use it, I'm not going to buy it. However, the Love palette does interest me. I am intrigued to see the quality of those shadows together. I know that that palette comes highly recommended. Again, people just seem to love it. Angelica loves it, and I trust Angelica's judgment when it comes to eyeshadow, and she and I have very similar styles as far as application and color and, you know, just general drama in the eyes. So generally I take her advice when it comes to suggestions and recommendations. Speaking of Angelica, have you seen her collaboration? She just actually launched a collaboration with Udenzai called the Hella Palette, which I haven't mentioned on this channel yet, come to think of it. And that's a really, really pretty palette with some beautiful green and pink tones. It's very pretty. But before she launched that and did that collaboration, last year, I believe it was 2021, she launched the Club Nebula palette with the brand Kaleidos. And that palette is really hard to find. That is like the unicorn palette, the Club Nebula palette, along with At Far Sight by Raw Beauty Christie and ColourPop. Both of those palettes, you don't often see them up for sale. And if you do, generally they're crazy high in price. Currently on Poshmark, there is one Club Nebula palette, which I think is listed for like $300. And I just have it, I just have it saved because then I can look at it now and then and go, but I'm not gonna buy it, not for that price. It's a beautiful palette though. It's got beautiful pigmentation and it's Kaleidos and everyone just raves about it. So I would like to try Kaleidos at some point. I do see a decent amount of Kaleidos on the secondhand site, but almost never Club Nebula. And I'm curious to see, I don't really know what their very last launch was. I'm kind of just holding on that brand to see what they come out with next. I will say about Kaleidos, with the exception of Angelica's collab, the packaging makes me a little bit dizzy. They have, I can't remember the names of them, but they have these thinner palettes that are like 6 or 7 shades. And they have like a galaxy design around the packaging. They open up like little books and they have a galaxy sort of theme. And I find them distracting because the shades, in my opinion, kind of get lost around all the colorful packaging, and that detracts from what the palette is offering. I understand packaging is important. I'm the first to admit that packaging is important, but my opinion is that the Kaleidos packaging for some of their palettes is actually hurting their presentation. And I just remembered Kaleidos' most recent launch was the Flower Punk palette, which I like. The Flower Punk palette and ColourPop's Tinkerbell palette combined are kind of reminding me of Angelica's new launch with Udenzai, which is called the Hella palette. It's those bright pinks and greens, but there are also some grungy yellow toned greens, and yeah, they're all just really pretty. The Flower Punk palette, again, Kaleidos, has been very highly reviewed, and I've really been on the fence as to whether or not I want to try to get that one for myself, but I think I've finally decided against Flower Punk just because I have some of those pinky tones in other palettes, and I have the minty green tones in other palettes, and then what's left is these deeper grungy greens, which don't really look that good on me. I look better in more bright, vibrant colors than the grungy greens, and so it might be a really pretty palette. It's unique, it's interesting, but at the end of the day, I don't think it's the best fit for me. But aside from that, I am interested in seeing what Kaleidos is going to launch next. Another brand that I have considered buying is Sigma. Sigma released the Cinderella palette, and that's the one that's kind of got me thinking about it. The Cinderella palette is really pretty. People have generally reviewed it as being a more mature version of Cinderella colors. You've got some blues and pinks and purples and golds, but in a more sophisticated way. And that interests me. I think generally the Sigma formula is very well reviewed, and so I have that palette kind of, on a back burner, like I might try that one, but again, I think I might be leaning towards not trying it simply because I know that the brand is going to be launching new things and releasing new things, and I don't want to spend all my money on older releases and then be bummed out if something new and exciting comes along. So Sigma is on my watch list. If I find a Cinderella palette for a great price, maybe I'll grab it, but generally I'm just keeping an eye on the brand to see what they come out with next. And then the final brand that I want to talk about in this video is Ace Beauté. Now Ace Beauté, a lot of people apparently don't know this, but Ace Beauté had launched a bunch of palettes. I don't know when they launched, sometime last year I guess, maybe the year before. They launched a bunch of palettes and they got pretty negative reviews overall as far as the formula. People were complaining about pigmentation, about buildability, about just lasting power. Generally, the palettes were not hugely popular. And so Ace Beauté, in wonderful capitalistic fashion, took their customers' feedback, reformulated, and then relaunched all those same palettes. And then people were able to compare the old formula, new formula, and say, here we go. they've really stepped up their game. Now Ace Beauté is a force to be reckoned with. And that is something which I really admire as far as as a brand goes. Instead of just brushing off what people had to say and whining about their sales not doing well, they actually reformulated and addressed the problem and came out with a product that was improved. And I think that's commendable. The reason I say that apparently not everyone is aware of this is because there are a lot of Ace Beauté palettes that are available on Poshmark. And when I ask people if they are the old or the new formulation, most of the responses that I get are, huh? What do you mean? So then I have to say, you know, like they reformulated about 5 or 6 months ago. Is this the new formula? And then they may tell me when they bought the palette, but then I don't know for sure if the new formula was sold as soon as it was, you know, or if they were getting rid of old stock, because on Ace Beauté's website, you can buy for a lower price the old formula, or you can buy for full price the new formula. So I've decided if I buy from Ace Beauté, I'm only gonna buy off of their website, or if I see a formula, it has to be specified, or if I see a listing, it has to be specified new formula. But I really, really like their color stories. I love the Oceanic palette. Oh, it's beautiful. This is the blue-green palette that I would buy instead of the Norvina Volume 2. This blue-green palette is so beautiful. They just nailed the colors, like the tones, the depth, the pigmentation. They nailed the layout of the palette, and they did a great job. It's a beautiful palette. It excites me. It makes me go, ooh. And I have that reaction to a couple of Ace Beauté palettes, actually. So I might just hold off until like Black Friday of this year and grab a bunch of them. We'll see. A couple of the other ones from Ace Beauté that really catch my eye are the Flare palette. The Flare palette is these hyper pigmented, rich, deep, beautifully saturated tones in blue, green, red, brown. I think there's a pink in there. It's really very beautiful. And that palette runs on the dark side, so as does the Oceanic palette in general. These are palettes that might do best if you paired them with a pastel somewhere, but I love those deep, richly pigmented tones. They make me happy, they make me smile. You can go in light and get a lighter version of that shade, and they're just, they're so pretty. There are 2 other palettes from Ace Beauté that I consistently have my eye on. One is the Blossom Passion palette, which is more like pinky reds. It's a little more Valentine's-y kind of feeling. It's also got some neutrals in there, and I think it's really pretty. And then the 4th palette is the Paradise Fallen, and that is purples. This is the reason that I'm tentative about the Cinderella palette from Sigma. I'm also tentative about the just the Norvina palette from Anastasia Beverly Hills, not one of the volumes, but just the Norvina. It's long and thin, and it is purples. But the Paradise Fallen palette from Ace Beauté is, in my opinion, much prettier purples. I think that the colors that they chose are deeper and richer and more interesting, and a little, maybe less safe, but a lot more exciting for somebody like me who's not afraid of putting color on their eyes. So that's definitely a palette that I've got my eye on as well. Okay, so that is my video on brands that I'm interested in trying as 2022 continues marching along. I'm super excited, totally stoked to get this melt palette, and believe me, you are going to be seeing some videos using the melt palette. I love it already. It's amazeballs. But I appreciate you hanging out with me. I hope you enjoyed this video. You have to let me know in the comments below. Please let me know the brands that you're interested in trying. If I've mentioned anything in this video that you have or you want to have, let me know and we can chat about it, because I do like to chat about eyeshadow. Remember that you can like and subscribe if you want to see more of this sort of thing, and hit the notification bell if you want to be notified. You can find me on Instagram at Shimmers and Silver. And until we see each other again, have a wonderful day. Bye!